Hey everyone, welcome back to the Layback Podcast. Joining us today is Denton Sagerman, assistant coach at Indiana University. He is part of quite a dynamic system there, and now a system with a little bit of turnover, but Indiana benefits tremendously from the two pitching coach model. Dustin Glant has moved on to the Washington Nationals in an assistant pitching coach role with the big league club, and Denton is now the mainstay on the staff. He is routinely taken, I guess, kind of the analytical, mechanical, and development side of things, but I'll let him get into that a little bit more, as well as let him introduce his new counterpart in red and white. So, Denton, thanks a ton for joining us during this holiday season. Looking forward to the conversation today. And how the heck are we?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Obviously, been a long adapter of Flex Pro Grip and really appreciate all the guidance kind of you and Daryl have both provided the program. So been huge mainstays. Love the podcast. Love everything you guys do to kind of push the game forward. So really appreciate that. Happy to hop on with you today for sure.
Thanks a ton, man. And straight away from here, I'd love if you could just kind of give the elevator pitch bio at this point.
Yeah, kind of a unique path. I would say we all kind of have a unique path nowadays into the game. So grew up originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and then kind of made my way down the University of Dayton for my playing career. Didn't really know what I was going to do kind of studying wise, kind of got to campus and was like, you know what, I'm here to play baseball. Let's see what else we can kind of do. And got into engineering. I always liked the math and the science side of it, just the problem solving side. So I thought that would be a really good fit for me. So got into that, got into aerospace engineering. Obviously, Dayton's a big aerospace kind of niche in Ohio and really got into that. Always was fascinated by airplanes and stuff like that. Thought that was really, really cool. So got into that, got my undergrad in aerospace engineering while I was playing. Got done with playing. I was like, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to do from here. I don't know if I really want to grow up yet. So I need to kind of find the next steps of what I can do here. Got an offer to get my grad school paid for in a master's in aerospace engineering. So was able to do some aerospace engineering research at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is in Dayton, kind of on the computational side, kind of my specialty. So was able to do that. Had a great time at Wright-Pat Air Force Base, and that took me 2 years in, and it was like, you know what, I like this stuff. I really enjoyed it. It's really cool, but I'd like to be on the field again. Would be really, really cool if I could apply these problem solving skills to baseball. That would kind of be the best of both worlds. So being young and inexperienced, didn't really know what that meant for me. So thought I needed another master's degree. So got a master's in sports and athletic administration through Gonzaga, an online program. Got that and needed an internship and was like, you know what? I played at Dayton, but there's another school in Dayton called Wright State. And I'm going to email their coach and kind of see if they need any help kind of on the analytics side, pitching development side, anything that I can help out with. And he got back to me right away and was like, hey, can you meet on Monday? Sent him an email on Sunday. Went in, kind of met with him. Was like, yeah, like you're in. We could definitely use your help. We want to take advantage of anything you can kind of help push the program forward. And spent 6 months there with our head coach, Jeff Mercer. Got done with that. Went into the private side, working with physical therapy facility, Orion Sports Medicine in Ohio, which they do a great job on like the sports performance physical therapy side, run by Dr. Phil Analogy, who's one of my good mentors and friends. He was kind of running their new facility, doing their throwing training, a lot of that stuff for about 3 months. And then Jeff got the job here at IU, and I get a call from him one day. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. It's been a couple months, and he was like, hey, I don't know if you heard, I got the head coaching job at IU. Would you be interested in joining the staff? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Like I started driving over. I started driving over to Bloomington before I even talked to my wife. I was like, I'll call her on the way and make sure that's good. But I think we're gonna try to make this work. So crazy. Look back 7 years later, and it's like you're having a blast. You feel like you get to do your hobby for your job every day. I don't feel like it's a job, and I love to work and kind of solve problems in the game and in baseball. So it's been kind of a unique path to get there. But I do think like the problem solving skills I learned from engineering is what drives me on the baseball side. And I think I'm able to kind of apply those in a unique way for our players in our program.
Do you still spend any of your time looking at airplanes, or is it just strictly baseball throwers at this point?
I do. I do really still enjoy like the aerospace side. Wright-Pat has a great, like the National Air Force Museum is in Dayton. I still make my way over to there when I'm driving home and all that. I do still look at that stuff. Like anytime a movie or something comes out about space or or anything like that, I'm definitely the first one to watch that stuff. But it's interesting. It's like all about solving problems. Like, do you have a problem? Are you able to apply like a test retest or an objective feedback model to that to be able to solve a problem? And a lot of those lessons I learned kind of on the engineering side for sure.
Well, thinking of your undergrad and even your first master's, what point in your career did you realize some of this aerospace engineering stuff could actually apply to ball flight?
I think when I was training, it's kind of started from when I was training. Like when I was playing again, like 2011 and 2015, it was like the start of TrackMan and Hawkeye and those things were starting, Edgertronic cameras were starting to come into the game. I didn't kind of reap the benefits of those during my playing career very much. A lot of things back then were like more subjective. It was like, I think you should kind of move like this, or I think your pitches should kind of move like this, or like it was much more of a subjective nature. And it was just so different from what my engineering background was, where it was like everything was objective based. It was like there's a way to solve the problem based on data and video and feedback. So I kind of think that's where it came from initially, was on the training side of like, I kind of gravitated towards throwing weighted balls and throwing plyo balls. And that side, it was like, hey, I think there's a way to like quantify, is this the right way to train, or is this a better way to train? I know my arm feels better when I do that. I know I throw harder when I train like that, but I kind of wanted to learn like, why is that? So I think that was kind of the impetus of that for sure. And then in terms of ball flight, when I was sitting in the wind tunnel one day, was like, hey, like I'm sitting in this flight simulator. It's like, this is pretty similar to how a pitcher throwing the ball, how it interacts with air. I'm pretty sure I can apply some things to this. I remember going up to my advisor kind of towards the end, was like, hey, what do you think about doing like a project on baseball, like in the kind of the fluid dynamics of that? And he was like, yeah, no, I think we're going to stay more towards the aerospace kind of applications for you. And I'm like, no, that makes sense. But, I think I'm definitely going to research this a little bit. So that was kind of the impetus. But yeah, no, it was definitely always there kind of once I kind of was able to tie the two together.
So, on your baseball performance trainer, coach, have you person Mount Rushmore, how high does Barton Smith rank?
Pretty high. I mean, I think definitely an innovator. I've never had the pleasure to talk to him. I would like to at some point. I've watched a lot of his stuff, and I think it's really interesting when you take like that side of like how he's able to work kind of on the experimental side into that. I definitely give him a lot of credit for kind of pushing the idea of seam shifted wake and all that stuff to the forefront. And just understanding, like putting those things into practice, like actually testing them, like not being the first guy through the walls always like gets the bloodiest, right? A little bit, like you kind of learn like bumps and bruises kind of throughout the way. But yeah, definitely like a huge innovator in the space, for no doubt, and has led me and kind of like guided me in a lot of the things that I look at and apply to our guys here at IU for sure. So definitely would love to meet him and kind of pick his brain a little bit kind of into the future. But yeah, no doubt, like one of the innovators in the space of fluid dynamics and ball flight and seam shifted wake.
So, speaking of the application of this kind of stuff to the guys at IU, I know some of this is part of the secret sauce and has to stay close to the chest, but when did you start actually applying these ideas behind ball flight and fluid dynamics to your players beyond just your own research, but when it actually transitioned to an on-field application?
I think it was first, like we probably all did in the space where like we're in a bullpen, we have TrackMan up, and it's like that pitch isn't moving like it's supposed to, or we expect it to, right? Or why are guys able to kind of get more movement or less movement? Or why does the catcher say like that pitch is gross, when you look at TrackMan, it's like, oh, that's not moving like the exact way that I thought it would be, from whether it's from Edgertronic camera or it's from video or the catcher's feedback or the pitcher's feedback or the hitter's feedback or just TrackMan, kind of like the observed versus inferred axis and all that stuff. I think that was kind of where it started, was like, hey, there's definitely something to this. Like it's not all based on Magnus effect. So I think that was kind of the big one to start, was like, being in the bullpen, kind of seeing all that stuff of like, hey, that's definitely not the whole picture. Like Magnus is not the entire picture. So I think that was like kind of the big one of like being hands-on in the bullpen and like seeing that, and then watching the Edgertronic video, I think is still the biggest part for me. Like there's definitely a part of like looking at the observed versus the inferred axis, and there's a ton of that stuff. And now TrackMan does a great job with their 3D axis spin cameras and all that stuff to kind of paint a really good picture of like what's actually happening. But I think it was watching the video watching that stuff like, hey, this is definitely not all moving based on magnetics. There's definitely something more to this. So let me dig into this a little bit deeper.
And just to kind of re-anchor the discussion for maybe I don't want to say more novice listeners, but maybe the group that isn't as deep on seam effects, the Magnus effect is the spin-induced movement, correct?
Correct. Yep. The movement you get based on the spin you're imparting on the ball.
So a lot of what you work in are kind of where we get into, I don't wholly want to say the art, because of course there is a science
Yeah.
behind
Yeah.
seam shifted wake, but maybe that's where the applied portion of it kind of becomes the art. So a lot of what you're working with is actually how the ball is interacting directly with the air, correct?
Yeah. So I would say like with every ball, like obviously when you impart gyro on the ball, this is like the seams on my ball here. Like once you impart some element of gyro on the ball, you're starting to impart seam effects on the ball because of like the separation points that are incurred based on how the flow's imparting with the seams. And then you're kind of looking at each guy of like, okay, for this guy's gyro, how can we kind of optimize his seam orientation to allow him to get the most seam effects on the ball? And I think a lot of that is kind of a mix, like you said, of an art of like, you're looking at the data, you're looking at the observed versus the inferred axis. You're looking at kind of those points of the separation on the ball based on the seam orientation. You're looking at kind of where that wake is kind of forming on the backside of the ball. And then you're looking at, okay, how can we optimize like his grip or his seam orientation to allow him to get the most seam effects for what he's doing? So basically, anyone with gyro is going to get seam effects. It's just how can we kind of optimize those that's best for him and consistent. I think that's one thing too, is like it can be when you impart seam effects, there's some inconsistencies in that. So you have to be able to kind of find what is a consistent way they can get those seam effects to get the true value of them.
How much trial and error is really associated with this on the development side? I know you've been chasing this down for a while. You obviously have a pretty solid background working with pitchers. I mean, you said this is your 7th year at
Yeah.
IU, and based on the master's degree, it sounds
Hmm.
like you've really kind of been going down this path for well over a decade now, which is kind of crazy to say. Granted, some of
Hmm.
it was you messing around or realizing there was something there back in your own college career. But
Yeah.
even at this point, I'm sure you have this tremendous library of grips, or you see a guy with a certain amount of gyro degree, and you can kind of call upon, like, oh, this has worked in a similar case in the past. But with the variables, kind of the uncontrollable variable of what a player is actually going to have an aptitude for, how
Hmm.
long is it normally taking you and that player in the development process?
I think we always start from like when you look at the pitch design process, we look at it more like holistically, like what is your entire pitch package and what do you kind of need to be successful? And that could be something for like how do you perform against left and right-handed hitters? How do you perform in different count leverage states? How do you perform just in different scenarios? And then what is kind of the missing thing for you? What do we need to kind of improve on? So we always kind of start with like the pitch arsenal as a whole, and then when we're making changes or adjustments, does this fit in for something that's going to help him from like keeping his entire arsenal in mind? I think is really important, and not just like we're designing a pitch in a vacuum. I think that can get a little bit difficult at times, and just something that you really want to stray away from. So I think you kind of start with that of like, hey, this would be a really good idea for him of like these adjustments we could potentially make. And then you kind of look into the data, obviously from TrackMan and Edger, based on like the inferred versus the observed axis. You look at the Edgertronic camera, and you kind of say, hey, this is not optimized for kind of his current gyro. Here's some potential adjustments we could make. We always start with like, we make a pretty in-depth video with all the data and the Edgertronic video for the player. And we kind of bring them in and we walk them through this because there's a lot of knowledge of like, this is how the ball's coming off of your hand. This is what's happening. This is the potential adjustment we could make that we think could really add 3 inches of horizontal movement. It could kill 2 inches of lift, whatever that is, or it could add 3 inches of lift, whatever it is. So we kind of outline that to the player, and then we kind of put them in an environment where like that's the most likely outcome. So whether it's something like a seam orientation ball where you have like the seam orientation kind of drawn on the ball or something like that, and we kind of start with that in catch play, and then we kind of monitor that on their next bullpen and TrackMan, and we're willing to make kind of minor adjustments to the grip kind of in that. And then it's about, does that grip stick? Like things have to be sticky where it's like, can he master the feel of that grip? Can he master the consistency of release of that grip? But yeah, it's definitely a lot of trial and error. And I think you have to be willing to apply that test and retest policy as long as you have an objective mind and like you're willing to like test and retest throughout. You can make adjustments a lot quicker and kind of know like, are we on the right path or do we need to deviate to a different grip or to a different kind of cue? Because like the other part too is like what you say is interpreted by a player differently all the time. So you have to get into that barrier too of making sure the player is understanding this in a way that you want them to, because how you think about what you're explaining is not exactly the same always as the player interprets that. So I think that's a big part, but it's definitely a lot of trial and error. But I think if you use objective feedback, that you're able to get to that a lot quicker.
One specific piece I want to highlight is you said you start with the arsenal. We start with the arsenal and then we'll look at individual pitches from there in the relationship to the arsenal as a whole. How difficult is that to stay focused on optimizing the arsenal as opposed to optimizing one specific pitch just because 21 inches of H break is really cool?
Yeah, for sure. It's tough because like, and a lot of that is like what guys see on Twitter, right? It's like that's awesome to have like the sweeper at like, 23 inches of break. And it's just like the frisbee slider they throw up there. But also if you look at it, it's like, okay, like what situation are you going to be in a game? What is your pitch package to right-handed hitters, to left-handed hitters? And then how does this play? What is the projected usage for this pitch? Like a lot of times we're banging our head against the wall on like moving a guy's fastball grip. And it might be only a 20% usage pitch to a righty anyway. So like we can do this, but like that's not going to be kind of where we get to anyway. So we don't want to spend all of our time there. And then there's like the interaction of like any guy that's a supinator. Like if we're working on a heavily supinated pitch, like a sweeper or whatever, there could be effects down the chain of like on his cutter, on his fastball. Like when you train that certain kind of that supination based grip so much, there's changes kind of throughout the arsenal. So you have to keep those kind of things in mind, but it's definitely difficult. And there's definitely times to do that. There's definitely times, especially with older guys that are a little bit more mature and have better proprioception and better like feel for like the release of the ball. Those guys are a little bit easier to be like, hey, we're working on the sweeper today, but then we need to kind of mix in obviously our fastball as well to make sure we're keeping that consistent release. Because, a lot of those guys will end up cutting the ball a little bit more kind of after going off of the sweeper. So you have to kind of adjust those things as well. But yeah, no, it's definitely can be tough at times, but it's something that I think when you look at the arsenal as a holistic pitch package, that's the best kind of way to start.
And sticking with the theme of the arsenal here, I really like asking this question to those who really are adept with pitch and arsenal design. If you are looking to optimize an arsenal for a guy, are you typically going to start with the fastball, or are you going to start with the pitch that already has the best stuff plus? Where's kind of our jumping off point?
Well, first, fastballs are difficult to change. So fastball profiles are not easy to change. People say like your gyro is your gyro. Like that can be a little bit difficult to change. Not saying it's impossible, but there's a lot, and a lot of that can come from like a mechanical perspective of like how on time is your arm, how's your kinetic sequence. Like there's a lot of things that go into that as well. Fastballs are difficult. We've had some luck with guys' fastballs. But I would say breaking balls are easier from a pitch design perspective, just because there's so much more variation in grip that those guys throw those with. But I think one thing that like is often overlooked is like adding velo to a breaking ball or a fastball is a pitch design new pitch in and of itself. So we also take that into account where like, yes, we can change the grip on your fastball, but if we also did like a velo cycle or we optimize your mechanics and your force production, and that got you 2 to 3 miles an hour on your fastball, that's also like doing a pitch design session with your fastball. So you kind of have to keep that in mind too. I think the really interesting part that we found is like, if you were to like pitch design a sweeper or a slider, what comes first, like the spin axis and getting that dialed in, or the velo part? Because a lot of guys, as they're learning that new pitch, and especially when they're not at a full intent in-game competitive situation, the velo on those are obviously lower. Kind of the trade-off of like making sure you can get it at the right velo and also keep that orientation and that spin axis to what you kind of need for it to perform well. So I think that's kind of one thing that we've battled a lot, and I think we have a good grip on now. But it's like ultimately you have to throw things hard. Like that's ultimately what's going to be the best, especially at the next level. There's some pockets in there where things can perform better at different velos. In general, throwing things harder is normally better, and that's definitely a trade-off. In that can like the frisbee sweeper at 74, like that's great, but like that ain't it. Like that ain't it. So it's the trade-off of that, of like, is this a grip? Yes, that you can get the orientation right, but that you can also throw hard and kind of get to the zones that you need to. So, but that plays itself out in our models and our numbers of like, hey, this is kind of the velo and kind of the movement and kind of gyro and orientation range that we need to get to. So we kind of keep all of those in mind, and we're kind of always keeping velo as a component of that.
If it is so difficult to alter the fastball, when might be a case where you actually tried to do something about it?
I think I mean, that's why I think the best part is like starting at like what happens at the plate. It's like we don't really adjust guys that much if they're having success at the plate. You can look at a guy's, obviously, well, dead zone is all relative to arm angle anyway. I think that gets a lot of people in trouble, that like my dead zones or my heater's dead zone. It's like, well, you throw from like a sidearm arm slot. So like, no, it's not. It's like, it's all about like, for us, it's like, what does the hitter expect your pitches to do from your arm slot? And we're trying to get far away from that if we can. So like if you're an over the top guy, like he probably doesn't expect your ball to like run that much, right? Arm side. If you're like a low 3/4, like he doesn't expect your ball to have any type of like lift on it necessarily. So I think we're trying to always deviate from the norm in terms of like what your pitches expect to do from that arm slot. So I think if you keep that in mind, you're in a good spot. But yeah, it would be starting from the plate. Like if a guy's like not having success with that pitch, and like the hitter's feedback is going to tell you a lot. Like that's what in the Stuff Plus era and all that, those things are great. And we have a bunch of models that help us kind of predict the effectiveness of a pitch. But like one of the most kind of underutilized one is like asking the hitter. Like the hitter will tell you if the pitch is good. Like, yes, your expected batting average, your expected WOBA, like whatever it is like X, Y, or Z on the pitch, like that's going to tell you a lot of like how that pitch performs. And like at that point, that supersedes the like dead zone or low Stuff Plus value that is on that pitch. Like if it's performing well, we're probably not going to make too many adjustments. But if it's not performing well, it's not consistent in the zone, and you may not have like a grip that feels super comfortable and confident with, then we look into that of like, hey, how can we get a more consistent grip for you? And then how do we kind of dial into like the intended zones of where that's going to play the best for you?
This might be me mixing up some big brain idea with something that actually is really simple, but has there ever been a mission to create a true Arsenal Plus type model?
Yeah, for sure. And there's ones out there. I think
Okay.
that's a huge part. There's a lot of those that will take like the deviation from your average fastball into account. So especially with like changeups and stuff like that, I think that stuff is really big. Yeah, for sure. There's no doubt of like when you look at things from an Arsenal perspective, you can say like, how good is this based on like your other pitches in your arsenal that could be effective. That's how we've gotten to a lot of changes with guys on that, based on like, hey, this may not show up in isolation as a high Stuff Plus like pitch, but like based on your other pitches, this will play even higher than what looking at that in isolation would be. So yeah, you always have to take into account the guy's general fastball, his release characteristics, his approach angles, his horizontal approach angles, all of those things to be able to build like, hey, what is the most effective pitch? But it does come down to like, does the hitter expect your pitches to do what they do from your arm slot? If your expected movement is the same from your arm slot as what the hitter sees every day, like, yeah, like it's going to get hit. But like if it doesn't, it's like the hitters always come back. It's like, man, I didn't expect it to do that. It's like, that's when you're on the right track.
So kind of along the same lines with this whole Arsenal design concept, but we're going to shift ever so slightly. Knowing your background with S&C, some of the stuff that you've done on the rehab side, are you ever seeing guys making changes intentionally or unintentionally to an arsenal or to a grip profile because of what they've experienced in injury or in their return?
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult one. and one that I think like I would say most people in the industry have like struggled with at times, because you obviously have the nature of like whenever you're doing low intent throwing, I think things can like maybe get a little bit tough. And that's why like a lot of I feel like the best rehab protocols happen based on like a velocity based like return to throw program. When you start throwing at low intent, there's maybe unexplained or unintended changes to like how you're moving and how you're throwing it and like the kinematic sequence, that I think are maybe not good for guys. And you kind of lose a little bit of lack of fuel as you're coming back. So I think there's some changes that are made there with guys that are returning the throw and throwing at a lower intent. And that's why I think like the velocity based return to throw programs are so good. And like the plyo ball kind of like return to throws have been so good, because you can kind of like constrain the throw when you're returning the throw so well now that like you're keeping a similar pattern to what you need to do when you'll be back to like full speed. I think that's really, really important. So we've just tried to like constrain things so much that like, hey, you're doing a pivot pick or you're doing this kind of like plyo routine that is going to be like, even though you're not at full capacity yet, you're keeping a similar, sequence and pattern to how you're going to throw when you're back, that like we're not creating any bad habits or anything like that, because there are just some pitches that are like more difficult to throw at lower intents. You are developing feel for that pitch throwing it at a lower intent, but you also just like in terms of arm speed and like, just overall like how your body's moving is completely different sometimes in those lower intent situations. So we try to constrain the best we can, whether it is like plyo balls, weighted balls, whatever it is that we can kind of keep a similar intent.
Two things I want to address here. One is the guardrails that you're kind of putting up to keep guys on the straight and narrow. Of course, you want them to be athletes and problem solve is what I'm gathering. It's not like you're preventing them from any deviation whatsoever. You're just providing constraints to avoid corrosive patterns. You want them to, I guess, operate with the intent of getting back to not the movement profile that got them hurt, but the movement profile that allowed them to be successful. Obviously, I know that that's a little funky when you're talking about trying to keep someone in the same movements. I would guess we're kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would guess we're kind of on the same side of the aisle here with oftentimes mechanics are not the thing worth changing in the injury.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I didn't entirely put words in your mouth there, which is why I paused to make sure you could at least agree or disagree with me quickly.
Yeah,
but then, the other side or the other piece that I wanted to address is what you said regarding certain pitches are more difficult to throw at lower velocities. That might seem like a very obvious statement to the masses, but where that gets so difficult in rehab, I would say from now my side of the aisle where we might be dealing with different populations is so often on this rehab side, we are recognizing that different pitches have different torques and different stresses on the elbow and the arm in general. Thus, each pitch type to a certain extent likely deserves its own ramp up or its own quasi throwing program within the greater structure of the return. But we then are left with the very difficult position on your side where you might be coaching a guy or working with a guy, getting him back to the field, and that slider just isn't moving or spinning the way we want it to, but we need to throw it at 65 miles per hour, at 68 miles per hour, at 71 miles per hour as we're slowly building up. Because the worst thing that we could do for this guy is say, great, you're now throwing your fastball at 93 again. You should probably start throwing the slider now.
Yeah.
Never working in that supinated position that they need to access when they actually throw the slider. So maybe this is a point where you're putting the art hat back on instead of the pure applied science hat. How do you manage that with a player juggling what you know needs to happen physiologically while still managing the psyche in the process?
The first one, maybe a little bit unrelated, is I think some guys too during the rehab process, they'll be like, well, I want to get back to how I used to throw. It's like, well, there's also some elements potentially in there of like, could be why you got hurt a little bit. So like we have to keep that in mind. We're not making mechanical changes necessarily, but we're trying to and that's where I think just like with the constraint sled approach of that side of like, you could potentially clean up arm action, optimize the kinetic chain. Like you're working on the sequencing part. A lot of that happens with like the plyo balls and weighted balls and kind of like the athletic throwing part of like you're really trying to get them outside of that rigid state where like most return to throw programs are. So I think that's kind of part of it too, where we found is like, guys will try to be like, I want to get back to how I used to throw. And like, again, for some guys, that's great. Some guys, like, there were some mechanical issues when they got hurt, or there were some things that like need to be adjusted. So we don't always want to go back to that exact state. But I think that's what like the constraints approach is so important, because it allows you to add that athleticism back into the throw and take the mind off of like, I just need to get in these static positions again, and I can just become more athletic and get to like, let's actually rehab and kind of on ramp the arm again to withhold those workloads or those torques or those kind of things that we need to be able to then attack those things from a little bit higher standpoint. So yeah, I mean, in general, like we'll start working spin and those things back later in the on ramp kind of process, and just kind of knowing that like when we get back to the mound and we're at a higher intent, we just want the feel for those pitches to be there. And then we can kind of work on the exact pitch design phase once we kind of get more acclimation of workload to them and they're in a better spot to be able to train at a higher capacity. But we definitely have them develop the feel for those once they're at a certain part in that on-ramp phase, kind of throwing program back from injuries. So again, depending on what the injury is, or let's say it's like a 12-week return to throw, maybe it's by week 6 to 8, we're starting to introduce kind of those back in or something like that, more so feel based. And then kind of once we get kind of back onto the mound, we'll kind of work on those from like a pitch design. We really don't like pitch design in terms of like working on pitch design stuff or even really mechanical stuff in that return to throw segment, because there's so many things going on. We really are trying to like get the arm and the body accustomed to moving at those speeds and to handling that workload and that torque during that segment, not so much working on those other things. But I do think you can attack kind of the mechanical perspective from when you implement those kind of those constraints led approach of like the weighted balls, plyo balls, and those athletic throws and catch play that are really good, and kind of steer away from the more rigid, distance based kind of throwing, kind of return to throws.
I want to make sure we connect the dots on one specific piece here. I'm hearing it loud and clear, but I think just to make it more obvious to the audience, which is the freedom that actually exists with a velo guided program, or at least that's
Yeah.
what's coming through loud and clear to me. Because if you're working through a velo guided either rehab / return to throw program, or truly just a velo guided on ramp, that is literally the only thing that you are utilizing as a true standard in the process. From there, you have all these options that you can choose from, because
Yeah.
my drill work or my constraints might look different than yours, than the next guy that we have down the line from us
Yeah.
going through the throwing program. Our athletic throws can look different. The weights we use look different. The actual
Hmm.
implement that we're throwing can look different. But knowing that we can manage torques with a radar gun, I think is actually very freeing instead of constraining.
Yeah, for sure. It's never maybe 100% made sense to me, like the distance stuff, because like really we're trying to get a guy to be like his best at 60 feet 6 inches kind of thing. So you kind of have that element, and then it's like, okay, like if we're doing pivot picks, we can monitor the radar of those kind of week by week from an on ramp from a pivot pick, and just kind of stay like, hey, we're kind of staying at this range week 1, this range week 2, and like we're kind of like, and then we're kind of using the athlete's feedback to like kind of progress those things. I think that just kind of really helps. And then you can kind of constrain the body in terms of how it can move. It's like on a typical pivot pick, like your hips are facing forward, like you're constraining elements of the move. So you really can't, like you can't throw that 90 miles an hour. So like you were constraining it from that, but like you can still feel like, okay, I'm going to like still move fast or move efficiently. But then it's like I'm taking a little bit of like parts of the kinematic sequence out of the chain. So then he can just kind of like go from there and feel athletic and feel smooth kind of with those throws, knowing that he's not going to be able to get to that velo that's going to like impair him at all if we constrain it in the right way. But yeah, going back to like the guide rails, I mean, that's kind of a staple of like the entire philosophy or program. It's like, I think of it of like, we all went bowling back when we were kids. We put up the bumpers, but like the athlete is the one throwing the ball down the lane. We're just the bumpers keeping them out of the gutter. Like we have all the information, we have all the tools, we have all the feedback, we have all that stuff. We're using those to kind of adjust the guide rails, but like it's their job to throw the ball down the lane and then guide that thing within those guide rails, because that's where a lot of the like secret sauce for like those guys come in, of like having the freedom to use their body, use their feedback, and kind of using their own intuition of like, how can I get there? It's like, whether that comes from a step back or a walk in, we give guidelines on that and what we think, but like ultimately, like we're after like what the end result is and what the end movement should look like. It's if they have insight onto what helps them get to that better and what they feel, we're just going to use the objective feedback to be able to tell them, is that working or not? And then how can we make minor adjustments kind of throughout that?
I think we can parlay this part of the conversation into the player education that we talked a little bit about off air. Obviously, this becomes very important with your program, with what you guys have available to you tech wise, not only on the field, but in the weight room as well. And something that I know you encourage to all ends, and that is autonomy. You want players to be able to be their own best coach at the end of the day, but you need to provide them either with the education or the proper information to make these decisions in the process. So what does that look like on your end, whether it's you specifically or the staff as a whole, in efforts to actually set up those bumpers to keep the bowling ball going ahead? We are okay with some variation as long as we can keep them in the alley, but as long as we're progressing towards those pins, we're good. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, I think it starts from education, obviously, of like what is like our mechanical buckets, like pillars look like. Like we talk about initiation, loading, rotating, and blocking phase of the delivery. So just as kind of like an example, like you kind of have those four pillars. And that's kind of how we break down video with those guys, or when we're doing after action reviews or things like that with them. We kind of break it down from those four segments. And then we kind of ask a lot of, what's your feedback? Like, what do you feel like? How does this look? But if you educate them on what are those four phases of the delivery? Why are they each important? And how do they fit within your specific case? I think you end up getting a lot of ideas and like kind of natural dialogue back and forth. A guy may come in and like, I feel like I'm struggling a little bit in my initiation part of my delivery, or like, how do I get into a better spot going in from my loading to my rotating phase? Like they kind of have a little bit of idea of like, why is this important? Why is this necessary? And then like, how does it apply to me? And then you kind of explain when you outline drills or kind of potential constraints or solutions to something, what is this targeting? What is this doing? How can this help you? And then it really arms them with like a freedom of like, okay, like I understand more the why behind it. And then I can maybe even look at some potential solutions that might work better for me, or I saw this, or, you know, I had another person mention this, or I know this worked for this guy. Our thing is always like, when you come in about that stuff, just like have a clear plan of why. What's the why? Why do you want to do this? And then we're definitely open to those kind of ideas, but it gives them kind of ownership in their career too, I think is a big part. Is something like Flex Pro Grip. It's like we kind of explain the benefits, we explain the research, we explain why this is helpful. And then we don't get a ton of like, you know, pushback on using it, because it's like we provide them with the resources, and then it's like, hey, this is what a lot of people have found, and there's a lot of research on this of why this can help you. This is how it's best implemented, and then they kind of take with it and run with it. You don't have to kind of check in like, hey, did the guys do it today? It's like, yeah, they did, because they understand the value, they understand the why, and they know how it's best for their career. And you can apply that to any, whether it's drill package, it's piece of technology, it's anything like that. And then I think they come up with their own natural ideas of like, hey, this is the kind of thing, this would be really good. And then it's like, always my first question is like, that's great. It sounds awesome. What does this specifically target in your development plan? What does this do for you? Does this help you load better? Does this help you with better initiation? Does this potential grip change? Like, what does that do for you that you currently don't have? It spawns them to think about things, you know, past the surface level, which I think is really beneficial for their career, because ultimately, like, we're not going to be with them every single day, every time they ever throw a baseball. So I want those reps to be as important as if we were there on the field with them during catch play. So it's like they can start to see like, okay, this is what it feels like, and this is what it looks like when it's good or when it's not good, or this, what the ramifications of this potential change could be, or this is why my slider performs best in this part of the zone, or this is why this pitch sequence works for me, or why my expected run value to a righty is much better in this location than this location. And then if a guy's swing potentially, if I read his swing in a certain way, this is how that could adjust this. It's like you're just arming them with being much more adjustable and adaptable and not so robotic. I think that's what we've tried to get away from, is being so robotic in this and being able to allow them to like free them with information and tools and resources. So when you go out on the mound, like it is straight up compete mode.
The words I was going to use before you kind of got to the definition at the end was going to be discovered versus recollected. You want guys to be able to work through a process, whether it's self-discovery or guided discovery, where they've gotten to a point where they can ask the questions, understand the why, if the why was discovered on their own, or if
Yeah.
it was guided by you guys, versus
Yeah.
if you just tell them up front, even if they have blind trust. Blind trust, like, fine, that definitely makes coaching relatively
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
But at the point, like, what's sticky about that? A player has no idea what the why is if everything is blind. I do think there is some merit. Now, like, being a dickhead about it isn't great, but if there is a little challenge or a pushback or the question why, and you sound like a whiny child, I don't care. That's fine, because ultimately it's going to force both parties to be better and
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
correct and actually work towards a solution in the end.
Yeah. And I would say like that's where, I mean, yeah, I'm not, we're not big on like, I mean, blind trust, like that's great. And a lot of players do have blind trust in their coaches. And I think that is important. Like there is that part, especially with guys that put in the time and effort to understand things at such a deep level. That is important. But we don't shy away from like players asking like for, why is this the case? Like, well, what about this? Because I think that, like, to your point of like that makes you become like a better educator, not even just a coach. We're trying to educate them to be the best version of themselves. And so that's happened a lot for me, of like a guy will ask, well, like, well, why is that the case? Well, like, why is that the seam, the spin direction or the axis on my slider? Why would this be better? And it's forced me to like really take a step back and like, yeah, like, no, I know it's right. I know this is what's going to work for him, but like I have to do a better job of explaining that to him and make sure he understands why, and have that backed by objective feedback. I think it's been a huge part of development for me, for sure.
Do you have any specific examples that you can even call upon, whether it's recent or early in your career, where a player approached you and you just straight up didn't have the answer?
Oh yeah, it happens all the time. I think anyone that says they, and I think anyone that says they don't, like that's what kind of a transition for me was like early on. I think maybe in all of our careers, but for me specifically, coming from such a technical background, was like I needed to prove my knowledge so much to the player, right? Where it's like we think that's going to be the best for it. And like I do think that's part of it, but it's switched a lot for me in the last couple of years, where like the first part, whenever like I work with the players, like you have to build like like trust in a relationship with them. Like if they don't like have that trust in that relationship with you, the next words that come out of your mouth really don't matter. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It really doesn't. There's a lot of really smart people out there, much smarter than me. It doesn't matter how much you know. It's about how much can you make an impact on that player. And there's a lot of smart people that aren't able to have that impact because they can't, they can't build that relationship with the player. So I think building the relationship and the trust with them is by far the number one thing for me with working with a guy. And then, but there is a part you do have to provide, like you have to show technical expertise in your area. You do. So I think that comes second for me now. But I do think that's been a huge flip of like, yeah, like there's been a ton of times where it's like, what I will say is like, listen, like, I don't know the exact answer to your question, but I will get back to you as soon as I know. Like right after this, I'm gonna do a deep dive and look into this, and we will break this down either later today or tomorrow, and I'm gonna get to an answer for you. But like I'm never gonna give an answer that I don't have like objective based feedback for. I just think there's a lot of times in coaching that it's like, well, the subjective part comes in. We're like, well, I think you should do this with your delivery, or I think you should do this. It's like there's a lot of really good like coaches that can do that. That's not necessarily like the lane that I approach it from. And I think you can do that. I just think it helps when you have like, you come from like a spot of like the objective feedback side of like, you actually know that's what's going to be best for the player. And sometimes that can be your eyes. It can be for guys that have seen it a long time and been in the game 30 years and have coached, 100 big leaguers. Like they definitely can see that. But there's always a way you can put some objective kind of point to it of like, this is what I definitely think you should do, and this is what it says from the data and stuff.
Because you mentioned trust in relationships, I'm going to make a really crappy segue here to talk about something that is a little bit different than I think anything that's been talked about on this podcast before. And part of that is because of your unique role on staff, also overseeing the catchers.
Yeah.
With you overseeing the catchers, I'm very curious what you have seen change over the years with the position.
Yeah, I think the role has grown a lot, especially at the college side. I think like the training, much like the pitchers, has evolved as well. I think like, from a mentality standpoint is the biggest thing with the catching position. Like we talk a lot about alpha mentality. Like I just want them to be the toughest, meanest, like guys that are like in charge, like want to be in the arena. We talk about a lot about like the man in the arena. Like they are the man in the arena behind the plate. Like everyone's looking towards them. They touch the ball every play. They are in charge of the entire defense, but they have to build that trust with the pitcher when they're out there. Like it is that catcher and that pitcher working together in tandem to get these hitters out. So I really think like building into like that culture of like that pitcher has to feel like the catcher is in the fight with them. And something we do, I think, a really good job of here. But it's similar from an environment standpoint of like we train at such a high environment. Our catching individuals are like, we blare the music, we have crazy environments, we have crowd noise. We catch really high spin machines at all different angles with all different weighted implements. I'm just making it as extremely difficult as possible. So when they get on the field, like the game just slows down a lot for them because there's so much required of that position. So, I mean, in game, we're asking them like, what do you see from a hitter's swing? Where are they on the box? There's times that they're calling the games. And I think they have a good feel of like having that vantage point of being behind the plate that none of us have from the dugout. So we rely really heavily on them for that impact. And like, yeah, they are just as much a part of the staff of anyone in terms of that. They know kind of which guys do well in certain situations, what pitches potentially like sequence the best off of each guy, or like, hey, he's kind of sitting this pitch, or I read on this swing, I can read foul balls. Like we educate them on the scouting report, just like the pitchers or just like anyone else. We definitely need their feedback and utilize their feedback quite heavily, but it comes back to the training. I think the training side is such a high competitive environment that we train in with the catchers. I think that's why they're ready for that situation.
Are catchers included on the pitcher's development plan or their execution plan at all?
I mean, yeah, I would say a lot on the scouting side for sure.
Mm-hmm.
On the development plans, like, yeah, we will sit down with guys of like, hey, like, what do you think? How does this guy's like when we're pitch designing a slider? How do you think that slider looks like? Do you think that would be more difficult to like see, or like what zones do you think that will be like the most effective on? And obviously we have the numbers and the data that'll tell us that, but you sometimes get some anomalies where it's like, hey, like when he kind of backdoors that slider to a lefty, like it's really effective. I really think you're going to get a lot of takes there. And those things, like we really value their feedback. Or he kind of threw the one splitter he threw 2 weeks ago, and the one he changed now, like I really think the old one's going to have a lot more kind of success. So we'll kind of definitely take that into account. But yeah, it's so much about the relationship they have with the pitchers, of like the feeling of like they're in the fight with them, and like it's what do we have to do to kind of get this hitter out, all hands on deck for sure. But yeah, it's the training of the catching side has exploded, just like on the pitching side. The way in which we're able to train glove speed, timing, layer, path, and just again, a constraints led approach with that stuff is huge. It's extremely fun group to work with.
And have you seen the pitcher-catcher relationship change at all in your years coaching?
Yeah, I think so. Just because like with like, I mean, now you have PitchCom. It's easy for them to call pitches. There's so much on the scouting report. The best part is like they're all hitters as well. They know what things are really difficult, like pitch sequences to hit. So I think that the relationship with them, especially with like in the past, like depending on if you kind of deploy like a normal, maybe a more traditional staff with like 3 starters and a Tuesday starter and a typical closer, bullpen, kind of whatever your is. There's been times where we've gone more matchup based kind of in games, and like we kind of use their feedback a lot for that of like, hey, going from this arm slot to this arm slot to this arm slot, like that is really kind of beneficial. And I think each catcher has their own unique strengths in things. And I think that kind of helps us too, where it's like we feel more confident bringing in a guy with runners on base that we feel is like an elite thrower back there, or like we have a really good feel for like, hey, these guys have called pitches for each other really well, or like this grad transfer pitcher kind of has a good plan for how he wants to attack guys, and he works really well with this guy. Those things have become more prevalent for sure. So yeah, the relationship between those two are definitely extremely important.
And at risk of yet another crappy segue, speaking of relationships, I was very excited to talk to you about your unique coaching relationship with Dustin Glant. Of course, he's now moved on. So you have Matt Myers joining the staff now.
Yeah.
Granted, it's going to be a new person. Not sure how much the role and role dynamics will change or shift, but I'd love if you could break down how your role fits within the greater staff's plan.
Obviously, with Dustin, a mentor of mine, has been a great resource to me and a great driver of the development of my career these last 4 years. A close friend and someone we're extremely happy for. I'm definitely proud of him, and just I've learned a lot from him. So he's been very important to me in kind of my development, and I've learned a great deal from him. And we worked really well together. I think allowing me to be kind of that second pitching coach is not taken for granted. It can be a little bit of a unique role on a staff, and kind of trusting someone else with helping with the development of the pitchers can be difficult at times. It can be like an initial change, but he's been awesome. He's been awesome in my growth, my developments. I owe a lot of kind of where I'm at to him for sure. Very excited for him. But yeah, with Matt Myers coming in, I think kind of a very similar role in some ways, but obviously there'll be a lot kind of on the on-ramp of kind of getting him up to speed with what we're doing. But kind of when we were looking throughout the process, like he's definitely the right guy for the role of what we need. He's been at kind of every level of both college and professional baseball, and I think kind of brings a great leadership style to the group and a great game management capability, having been a head coach. Having done those things will be a great fit to the group, and still allow me to kind of do the development based things that are kind of in my wheelhouse. And I think when we looked at it of like your goal is like when you deploy a staff is to keep guys kind of in the lanes that are like their expertise. And I think that's kind of something we were able to do with kind of bring Matt in. And I think it'll be a great fit and be a great resource to the entire group.
That's something to be really excited about. I know it's tough to make a transition on a staff, especially mid-year. This is obviously something we talked about off air and is all too real in the college baseball landscape right now. I mean, let's face it, this is going to be a problem every single year. It's just funny how the pendulum swings, whether it's pro ball poaching college pitching coaches or college ball poaching big league coaches or pro ball coaches. It just seems to go back and forth year to year or every couple of years. Bringing in someone new and finding someone that can fit the culture is definitely going to be difficult. As you outlined, what does become, I guess, a strength or an inherent strength is a group that understands a culture when they can bring in someone that, no, it's never going to be direct plug and play, but somebody that has a specific strength or skill that they can deploy immediately. So for instance, you said Matt Myers has coached and worked at every single level in damn near every single role. So what he can do right away is provide a cool, calm, collected leadership, game management mindset and approach is at least what I'm understanding from what you shared.
Yeah, and had a lot of success in those different roles. His last stop with the Pirates, like they had like one of the best minor league pitching, organizations in the league. Whenever you can bring guys in that fit from a culture perspective, what you want to do as a group, we're very lucky to have kind of like the pieces fall together to have him, be willing to do that and be available. I think was a great resource and great value add to the organization. So definitely excited to be able to get to work with him, excited to get to learn from him. And I think he'll just kind of push the staff forward and be able to elevate the program to a new level.
Awesome. And I'm sure the Hoosiers' hopes are high, hopefully a Big Ten title or a trip to Omaha. I'm guessing that's on the goals or objectives written out somewhere. You talk about team pillars and all those things. I know you guys are no slouches in what you've been able to do developmentally, and now hoping that we can attach some hardware to it. So maybe we'll turn this over for the more generic. I know we're not going to get any true hot takes, but what is the outlook for the 2026 Hoosiers baseball program?
We have a great group of guys. We're really happy with where we're at. And the expectation when you're at a program like IU is to win and to win at a high level. And I think that's what we expect to do and want to do. And we have the pieces to be able to do that. Obviously, we need to do the work on our end to be able to do those things. But when you're at a place like IU and you have the pieces in the program from like both a staff and a player perspective that we do, we expect to be able to win at a really high level. And that's what we're preparing to do every day. So yeah, we expect to compete at a national level, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Excellent. Well, Denton, this pretty much does it for me, aside from one last kind of simple question is, do you feel we missed anything that's worth sharing? This is now just kind of where I turn it over to you. I know we went crazy deep on a couple topics, which probably limited how wide we actually got in the discussion. But if there's anything else that you feel is necessary to share at this time before I demand you come back on the podcast next off season, I'd love to just turn it over to you one last time.
No, I think that was good. It was really good questions. I'm appreciative of all that you guys have done and kind of resources to our program. I think that's, when we were looking at kind of outlining, one thing I think we do a really good job of is like building like an arm care like resource to our program. And obviously Flex Pro was one of the biggest kind of things that we wanted to target of like continue to work with you guys with all the things you guys have done and obviously protecting guys arm health, protecting UCL, and just like obviously increasing performance. I think that's a big part too, is not just keeping guys healthy, but maximizing performance, which has been a really good thing. And we take the arm care kind of side of things a little bit differently, where we're not just looking at keeping guys healthier, we're looking at maximizing performance. So whether that be from like how detailed we monitor workload to how we, train guys from a velocity-based lifting system in the weight room, there's a lot of things we do to like kind of optimize training on that end too. And Flex Pro was definitely one of those that we targeted like kind of a mainstay within the program to be able to do kind of both those things of like keep guys healthy and maximize performance. So we've been extremely happy with our relationship with you guys. And obviously we'll love to continue using the product and seeing the benefits from it.
Well, I appreciate that. But since you brought it up, we will dig deeper one more time. So I guess thanks for opening the door. I don't know, maybe you'll regret this ever so slightly before we record for however much longer this takes. But you brought up increasing performance versus the injury prevention side.
Yeah.
That is a classic problem that exists on our side. It's very difficult to sell prevention. Let's face it, prevention isn't sexy, but performance very much is. Whether it is Flex Pro or really any technology, even if the underlying factor in making a decision is trying to keep guys healthier, how do you package something or how do you present it with the performance kind of in the forefront so players get excited about it with the added benefit on the back end of knowing if an athlete does this, they're going to be healthier?
Yeah, I think we look at arm care as increasing performance, not just feeling better. So I think that's a big part too of like you are going to like one from a mental standpoint of like when you feel like your body is in a better spot and you feel more bulletproof, you could say, like you are going to perform better. So I think that's a big part of like just from a mentality standpoint of like you feel like the more work that you do and the more areas or the low hanging fruit that you kind of take off of your plate of like whether it's arm care, whether it's workload monitoring, which is like a huge part for us is the workload side. You have like the strengthening the muscles of the UCL. You're doing all these things termed armored heat, arm care, dynamometer testing, grip strength testing, velocity-based movement training in the weight room. Like you're doing all of those things to like not only to like optimize your training, but like optimizing your training is both going to keep you healthier and it's also going to maximize performance, because at the end of the day, if you're not able to move the way you want and to perform the way you want, you're not going to be the player that you want to be on the field. So that's a really big part. And I think guys buy into that for sure of like that, being healthier is a component, but like not just being healthier, but like, can we like go past the point of being healthy to then like transition, like we're optimizing performance. We have potentially a less risk of injury training like this, but we also have the added benefit of being able to perform at an even higher level if we do that. So yeah, we're definitely targeting both of those things for sure on a daily basis.
If I can make the link, this kind of sounds very similar to what we discussed earlier with velocity in a throwing program actually being very freeing, in the
Yeah,
sense that if you know you are checking that box and taking care of the measurement or the thing that's actually being tracked, you then can open the door for performance. Mentally, like I know I have done every single thing I need to do, and because of that, I can go pedal to the metal with
yeah,
no fear or this clear mind that I'm going to be good. I've done every single thing in my power to be as good as I can be. And because
yeah,
of that, outputs become easier to achieve. Or on the other side, beyond just the being mentally free, let's face it, if you're doing the right things, not only are you going to be mentally free, you have probably also trained for certain adaptations that are actually going to allow you to produce or handle forces better anyways.
yeah,
So whether it
yeah,
is actually giving you the mental freedom to be as good as you can be,
yeah,
or tapping into something that you maybe have never trained or looked at before that is now actually optimized your force output,
yeah.
seems kind of like a win-win to me.
Yeah, I think of it's like a guy going into a velo cycle for us of like we're looking at data from arm care, which is like dynamometer testing, IR strength in the shoulder. We're looking at flex pro grip data. We're looking at pulse workload data. We're looking at Newt force, ground force data. We're looking at biomechanics data. We're looking at your jumps and your force output in the weight room. All of those things go into deciding like, are you ready to like do that velocity program? Let's just say. So like if we check all of those boxes and we continue to have those KPIs along the way of your training of like how things are going, we feel like you're in a really good spot and we're not going to put you in that situation before you're in that good spot. And then we kind of have checks throughout the cycle on all of those things of like, where are we trending? Actually, this was a little bit off today, or like we need to maybe adjust this. Hey, do we take a minor deload and then go back into another on ramp? Like there's a lot of checks and balances kind of with all those different tools and resources that can just help paint a more clear, objective picture that I think it gives you like the ability to be like, okay, I feel good about doing this. Again, things are always going to happen. That's just the nature of the game. Like we're trying to throw a 5-ounce ball 100 miles an hour. So like there's going to be things that like unexplained things that can happen. But like at the end of the day, we're using all of those feedback tools to make the best decision we can for the athlete. And that's all we can ask as long as you're using those to their fullest capability.
Well, I would say we are now at a point where we've probably hit everything we can in about
Okay.
an hour, probably a little bit longer. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
opening up that new line of conversation. Of course, I
Yeah.
can talk about arm care all day, and I'm sure you
Right.
can
Right.
too. But
Yeah.
we're probably good for the moment. Like I said,
Okay.
until I force you to come back on next off
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
season or
For
this
sure.
summer. So maybe after a Big Ten championship, I guess I have to be careful how hard I claim that. So, we do work with another Big Ten school as well. So, of course, I want both of you to meet in the
Right.
Big
Right.
Ten title
Yeah. For
game
sure.
and
For
you
sure.
guys to play 36 innings and then be like, you know what, tie. Both of you get
Yeah.
number one seeds
Exactly.
going to Omaha. But yes, Denton, thank you so much for joining me today. This was an awesome conversation. I appreciate you going a mile deep on some of those topics because I think we wore out fluid dynamics, ball flight, and arsenal design just about as much as we could. Thanks again, man. And of course, to everyone out there, thanks for laying back with us.